Welcome to the Clergy Couple Care webinar. My name is Father Alex Gusedes, the Director of the Center for Family Care. We are coming to you through the generosity of Leadership 100, who sponsor many of the ministries of our department. Today we are speaking with His Grace Bishop John Abdalah, and our topic is loving thy neighbor, even if they are difficult. Bishop John has a Doctorate of Ministry degree in Pastoral Care from Pittsburgh Theological Schoo, a Master of Divinity from St. Vladimir Seminary, a Master's in Pastoral Counseling from Pittsburgh Pastoral Institute, a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Suffolk University, and is a clinical member of the American Association of Pastoral Counselors. For 33 years, he served as a priest of the Antiochian Archdiocese. In 2011, Bishop John was consecrated auxiliary of the Diocese of Worcester and New England. He was married to Joanne Josephs until her repose in 2008. Bishop John is the father of Gregory, Joseph, and Maria. Welcome, Your Grace.
It's a joy to be here. Thank you.
Before we begin, just a reminder to our listeners that if you have any questions during the course of the webinar, look for the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, type your questions, and we hope to cover as many of your questions as we can during our time. We all deal with difficult people, whether they be family members, co-workers, even those in the church body. Jesus certainly experienced conflict with a wide variety of people. In Matthew 18, he offers advice as to how to negotiate with difficult people or with a conflictual situation. We read, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector." Sound, practical advice to be sure, but there are so many layers to the spiritual impact of dealing with our neighbor, including difficult people. Your Grace, in the description for this webinar, you indicate that, quote, "caring for our neighbor can be a temptation or an opportunity," close quote. What do you mean by this?
Father, the opportunity is for us to surprise our neighbor. Our neighbor is everybody from our spouses and children and parents to people that we meet casually or end up working with. And St. Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain refers to each person as a macrocosmos, a macrocosmos living in a microcosmos. He understands that each of us has a whole world of experiences and confusions and difficulties and problems, and the world that is kind of less than each human being in its complexities. And we know how complex the cosmos is, so he's really indicating just how complex every human soul is. So when we surprise somebody, when they act out of their brokenness or confusion, we have an opportunity for healing. People who are hurting respond to us in ways that reflect their pain. And if rather than reacting to their assault, if you will, that's really meant to protect them and take care of themselves, if we surprise them by listening, by offering them comfort, by modeling something different, from that surprise is an opportunity to really do as Christ did, be a healing presence and allow people that hospitality, that hospitalization, if you will, to stretch, to grow, and to heal. Temptation, we're tempted when people attack us to fight back and then lose our own peace and joy. So every encounter with the neighbors is for me an opportunity.
As clergy couples, when we think of difficult people in our lives, our minds often seem to go immediately to the quote-unquote difficult parishioner. Is there a way to reframe that cognitive behavioral or instinct that we go to right away?
Well, truth is that we're in relationship with everybody that we meet. And the difficult parishioner we see as someone somehow in opposition to us. I used to get a leadership magazine that had just these really wonderful cartoons. Really, I bought the newsletter for the cartoons. And one of the cartoons had a preacher putting his finger up the nose of the person in the front pew. And the parishioner's wife in the bubble says to her husband, "Gee, Reverend, is a little bit personal today." Everything feels personal just because their finger is up our nose. And usually it isn't. Usually people are responding out of their pain. So if we understand somebody's complexity, we have a chance to change the encounter. We can't change them. God can change them and they can change them, but we can't change them. But we can surprise them and we can change the way that we respond. For me, each of us goes to a parish because our bishop sends us to the parish to be a sacramental leader in the community, to model, to serve, to live with them. If we come in as a parent figure, as is our usual kind of frame or understanding, then we're going to catch all of the heat that comes from all of their dysfunctional experiences and authority problems that parishioner has had up until this point. And especially if you have a parishioner who's 70 years old and you're a 24-year-old priest like I was, to try to parent a 70-year-old as if he were a child doesn't make sense, causes all kinds of confusion, and generally just doesn't go well. But if we understand, if we can change ourselves, if we can frame the situation so that we understand that we're there to serve them, to love them, to model good behaviors, to show them what we learned from the fathers and from the seminary and from the scriptures and from all our really great seminary work, what it means to just love and be right with God. If we can model that and teach by example, then we have a chance. I've heard it said that the whole world is as if we're playing tag, and if we chase after somebody like we do in the tag game, then they automatically will run. But rather than chasing them, if we just sit still, stay calm, even if they're yelling and screaming at us, if we listen to their words and help them understand that we at least hear what they're saying, we can begin to help them feel understood, help them feel heard, and help them see where God is in their lives. So that's what I mean by surprise.
So our inner state has as much to do with the situation as the other person's disposition.
Absolutely. We're as complex and as a macro cosmos as they are, and they're hooking us all over the place. So rather than worry about our feelings, if we kind of keep our intellect in charge and take everything everybody says as just simple information, we can then sort that information to see what's worthwhile and to see what's not worthwhile, and just stay close to concentrating on the information. My favorite analogy is the mail. And this morning I went out to get yesterday's mail, and in my whole mailbox, which was at least half full, there was nothing that made it even into the house. I looked at all of those pieces, and they were for credit cards I couldn't afford, and advertisements for things that I don't want or need, and the whole lot of it got thrown away. So everything everybody says to me is like a piece of mail. And once in a while, there's something that is really good, and I'm going to use it. Some of it I'll even save. But most of it doesn't even make it into the house. Now, I don't want to be rude about it, because it's my job to live among people and to love them. But you could see, because you know me, that I'm not too skinny. And if you tell me that I'm too skinny, I'm going to weigh your words. I'm going to know that that's not a problem that I have. And I'm going to smile and say something like, well, that certainly is an observation, not one that I need to worry about. I'm not going to get offended. I'm not going to get upset. And if you tell me I'm too fat, well, that shouldn't upset me either, because I am too fat. And if you tell me I'm too fat, it's because you care enough about me and love me enough to call me to some repentance about eating better. And I'm actually thinking about that, because I'm trying to do better, but it's old habits die hard. But it's not going to be about you. It's going to be about what you said, and I'm going to try to deal with it as God would want me to make sense of it and to deal with it properly.
Your Grace, can you give us some advice, maybe continuing on this train of thought, as to when do we engage a difficult person and when do we perhaps need to ignore them?
What I have been telling seminarians for years is that in our business, it's not good enough to be right. What we really want is to be effective. So I ask myself, what is the most effective way? And usually it means building a relationship of love with them before I tell them the truth in love. Help them understand that what we share really is good. In the quote that you started the program with, which I think which leads ultimately to the possibility of excommunication. This excommunication is not ever a punishment. It's always a mercy. It's a final call for someone to repentance, to come home, to journey back. So when we ask someone to refrain from coming to the chalice, even for a while, it's not to punish them. It's to give them a way home, a way of healing, a way of growth. So that's kind of the extreme. So, but it applies to every encounter. So I think we need to be mostly teaching by example, mostly by modeling good behaviors, mostly by helping people understand why the church says what she says, and not let it be about personalities. So a difficult person becomes a challenge that they're not going to get to me, and I'm not going to tease them or make their life even more difficult than it already is. If they're difficult, it's because they need coping mechanisms because of their pain. And it's going to take some time before I build enough of a relationship with them for them to trust me enough to for my words to be effective. But we can help people understand, just staying close to the content of the message, what works, what's important, what's real, what's true, what comes from God, what brings real healing and peace.
So as a parish priest or a clergy couple, would you say that the state of the relationship is actually even more important than how it's resolved? That maintaining the ties and connections with people, even if they're difficult, might be, well, definitely better than the resolution, but not to lose sight of the overall relationship within the body of Christ?
I agree. I agree. It's all about relationship. I had an ex-Baptist pastor who converted to Orthodoxy say that the pastor never wins a fight. If you win the skirmish, you gain a person who needs to get even with you and is going to be gunning for you to regain his dignity. And if you lose the skirmish, then you lose credibility. So somehow, by keeping it not about winning or personalities, if we can keep it about issues and maybe even put things off so that we have a little bit of time and space for everybody to cool down and think creatively and outside of the box, we can come up with solutions where no one has to lose face or and the will of God can come forth, and so sometimes even if it takes a couple of extra months to fix something in the parish, how to cover the radiators was a big struggle in my first parish, or whether or not to fix the radiators. But the issue really was who has the right to decide when and how we cover the radiators. Everybody agreed that they were ugly, but what's the best use of parish funds and all that other kind of stuff? So how do we do that? So it's fun. It's a challenge, and it's fun to be able to think creatively.
I think in reading scripture, Jesus seems to model that a great deal in the interactions he has, that he allows the person he's interacting with, even if there's a conflict, to come to their own conclusion, as opposed to imposing his will. I'm thinking of, certainly the parable of the prodigal son. The father allows the younger son to make his own decision of his own choice. Even with the older son, everything I have is yours. He still welcomes him in, but he allows each of the sons to make their own decision. The rich young man, the same thing. So it seems, at least in the words that you're offering, that Jesus models this exact behavior of maintaining an openness, a relationship, but ultimately allowing people to make their own decisions and not necessarily imposing our will on others.
I'm with you. Christ surprises us every time, and usually he has us relate to the actor in the story who we think is the good guy until the punchline, and it's always a call to repentance.
Grace, there's a question that's come in from one of our listeners. Sometimes the problem is a group that needs a scapegoat. The accusations can be serious, and they seem to control our ability to interact with them. Okay. Your thoughts?
Sure. Oftentimes, the problem is not personal. It's the way that a organization or a family operates. And so when the change is a system change that needs to be made, the systems change very reluctantly. And the system itself is very powerful. So you can change all of the lay leaders and all of the clergy leaders in a parish and still have the parish repeating the old dysfunctional ways of dealing with things, because the systems all somehow maintain themselves. So the way to change the system is to help everybody who's involved in the system see the problem, and then engage everybody who sees the problem in an exercise of brainstorming as to what to do about the problem. You do this for buy-in, and then together you come up with some possibilities that you try and evaluate. Christ was the ultimate scapegoat. He died for other people's stubbornness and stupidity and sin and rejection and inability to see truth and inability to love. So we don't need to repeat that. We don't need scapegoats. We can call upon Christ. We can use Christ's example, and we can change systems. But know that it's going to be a lot of work. Systems change hard, and we just need to be willing to do all of that hard work. And sometimes we sacrifice feelings, time, energy, but we still need to do the work, because it's right to do.
If we can return to the theme that you had developed earlier, perhaps we can, if you would like to add a little bit more about some specific strategies in dealing with difficult people, especially from the clergy perspective, parish priest, clergy couple, and just some specific strategies that our clergy couples might consider.
I certainly hear your question and understand I understand what you're saying. Help me be sure that I understand what you're saying. Is this what you're saying? A, B, C, D? And if that is, then you know that I'm hearing you. If not, you have an opportunity to correct my faulty perceptions or understanding of what you said. And I have enough self-confidence to accept the blame for any miscommunication, whether or not you even said something at all. I could take the blame for that, because ultimately taking the blame doesn't cost me anything. So that becomes easy. I even my wife and I had an understanding with our sons that if they didn't want to do something like smoke or drink or hang out in places, they could blame us. That they have, and we would back them up in any way that they wanted to blame us for them to be able to make good decisions, and they used that, and I think it's a better way to go. So we can get a lot more done in the parish if we don't need credit. My dad had a wonderful line. His line was, "If you have the cash, you don't need the credit." And so that probably is less understandable today, because we do everything on credit, and it doesn't bother us, and it doesn't matter. But if we can let someone think that it's their idea and they buy in and we get our way, then let's be satisfied with winning, and worry less about the credit.
You noted earlier that Jesus was the ultimate scapegoat, and following Jesus's example, we have the long litany of saints so many of them who dealt with difficult circumstances, difficult people. And it would seem to me, at least, that if we were to read more of the lives of saints, understand the context in which they live, how they responded to it, it seems like that would also be such a helpful object lesson to understand other contexts of how to deal with difficult people and difficult situations.
Sure. Yeah, sometimes it's our own need to feel competent and understood, that we need other people to admit that we're competent. But another one of my favorite lines is, you, me, and God makes a majority. And so if the rest of the world doesn't understand, if you, me, and God can agree, then that's going to be enough for me.
And specifically what comes to mind among the many saints is in the case of St. Nectarios, where the difficulty, the conflict, the pain was something inside the church, not from some external threat, which we often talk about, but this was a particular situation in which the internal struggle brought about such pain and dysfunction. And St. Nectarios lived for many years in basic obscurity. But what I really have appreciated in his in one of his biographies, there are the letters that he sent to Patriarch Sophroni, which is such a model for us of strength and humility in stating his case, but not being over the top, asking for resolution. And I just am always drawn to the combination of strength and humility and patience in some of the correspondence that he offers. So again, there just seems to be so many examples within our church of healthy ways of dealing with conflict.
I would dare say that 90% of the pain that I've endured in my life has come from family and church, the two places where we should imagine, or that we imagine that it wouldn't come. But the reason that it comes is because we care about family and church so much. So that's the cost. That's the cost of love. That's the cost of being. But I wouldn't trade either one for anything, you know. So, but the expectation that people in the church should be holy before their time is unreasonable. We're all growing, we're all developing, we're all in different places of that work. And so we need to just get used to it, I think, and change our own expectations.
Another question that's been submitted: for the priest, clergy wife, clergy couple, clergy family, what are some ways to nurture the love of God within so that his love is more available through us to flow into the lives of others, particularly those we find more difficult to love?
Our families have to be a priority. And that doesn't mean that we ignore always the most, that we ignore crises in the parish. We need to take care of things kind of, we triage. In the church, everything is triage. But our spouses need to know that we come first. And that's true of the priest wife putting the priest first, and the priest putting the priest wife first after God. And that's a building block. So together, the priest and the clergy family can model. It's an opportunity to model, and the more we can model, and the healthier and holier the community can be, the more serious the community can be, by seeing that we're serious about the right things, that we're serious about God, and we're serious about the church. The more they can also hold us up and protect us and lead us and guide us. So it can become, it needs to be a two-way relationship. I'm responsible to you as much as you're responsible to me. And by being responsible to and for each other, we are saved together and we work together.
Along those same lines, Your Grace, you have served as both parish priest and as a hierarch. Can you help those of us who serve as clergy to know when to bring issues of conflict and difficulty to your attention? When is the right time that you would serve as mediator in times of difficulty and conflict?
The relationship between the bishop and the priest is a team membership, you know, and the priest represents the bishop. So the better informed the bishop can be, the better the position that the bishop is to support and help the priest in doing what together we come to understand is God's will. We have to see that we're on the same side. So if a parishioner gets to the bishop first, then the priest is in a compromised position, because now the bishop is hearing about something that was done on his behalf that he's clueless about. So we can help the bishop help us. I used to tell my son when he was putting on his shoes, help me help you. You know, because if he didn't relax his foot, I couldn't get the shoe on. And interestingly enough, 30 years later, he brought that back to me. Help me help you. He remembered that, and that's what he tells the people in his parish. Help me help you. You know, come meet me halfway. Let's work together and make sense of that. The bishop wants to help the priests, but the priests need to help the bishop help him, and by giving him the information, by keeping him informed, and by not taking positions that are different from the positions of the church or the canons or even the positions that the bishop has taken. That makes it all the more difficult. I think bishops do as much as they can, and I don't think it's so hard for a priest to imagine the position that the bishop is in. He can't, you know, the bishop can't transfer the parishioners, and so let's think about what can be done, what can he do, and then help him help you.
But knowing that is a potential resolution of transferring the priest, that might discourage our clergy from presenting difficulties and conflict to the bishop, knowing that the possibility exists that this may be resolved by my being reassigned.
And sometimes being reassigned has all kinds of pluses that we don't even know about yet, because the bishop can see things from a wider scope or perspective than we can, knowing the needs of not just your parish but other parishes too. I don't think any bishop today enjoys transferring priests, and I've heard a couple of bishops say they think that it's good for priests to move every 10 or 11 or 12 years, something like that, so that the good priests get to influence more than just one parish in a career, and so it's beneficial for the parishes and such, which is also a concern for the bishop. But again, sometimes we think of transfers as punishment, and I don't think punishment is effective parenting. I don't think it helps. I don't, but it's just better when we can work together and see that we're on the same team.
Another question from one of our listeners. I keep remembering something that His Grace Bishop John said, quote, "You keep expecting this stuff to get easier," close quote. How do we remain encouraged when we seem to have so much to learn?
Try to see things from God's perspective. God, who is outside of time and sees things in multi-generations. And take comfort that you're part of God's team. And even if some parishioners don't seem to learn, or may not learn for 20 years, that if you planted the seeds and you did what's right, it's good. Sometimes we look for immediate success, and if we don't see that immediate success, we count it a failure, and that's short-sighted. Sometimes we're planting seeds that take a long time to grow, and they grow as they grow. We're not going to worry them to grow faster. And sometimes people need to hear things from somebody else or in a different way. And so we're all a team and we're all together. And there's a saying that if you pluck a tomato plant out of its roots to check its root structure every day, that the tomato plant won't grow. So sometimes we over-evaluate. I think that if we keep it simple, we live better. It's my job to be faithful to the people that I'm sitting with, and it's my job to be faithful to God. And the results generally are between them and God. And not take on to myself things that are not mine to take on.
In those chronic situations of difficulty and conflict, would you as a hierarch encourage your clergy to seek counsel from perhaps their spiritual father or a therapist or one of the now growing clergy peer groups that are forming and developing?
Yeah, it's up to each of us to figure out what we really need and to find out where to get it. But most of the time, the answer is it's not about you. It's about the difficult person. And so why take on unnecessary pain that will not bring us any benefit? I don't mind suffering if the suffering brings salvation. I don't mind suffering if there's some benefit to it. But I'm not a fan of suffering for suffering's sake. So let's think it through and go forward.
Just a statement from one of our listeners. Sometimes when we need help, we do extra liturgies. Sometimes it's magical the way the unexpected happens. Can you speak on that?
I always trust God to do what he wants to do, and I don't overrule him, and I don't require that he call me before, and I don't tempt him and tell him to give me certain signs. But certainly I know that God acts, and I'm going to be thankful for whatever he does. But I am going to be slow to interpret what God is doing, because as I said, I can't get him to call me before he does things.
Before closing, Your Grace, any final thoughts, any final suggestions that we as clergy might consider on this topic of caring for our neighbor, even if they are difficult?
We need to know that God has received us as we accepted to enter into his ministry, and that the bishop sends us because of his confidence in us to represent the church and to live among the people and to guide them. So let's get our confidence and our stamina and our feelings of comfort from God and from each other, and not rely on parishioners who are noisy or parishioners who are even nice to flatter us or define us. Very few of the parishioners that I served have gone to seminary. Very few of the parishioners really understand God's will or what I'm about. So I'm going to let them say what they say. I'm going to weigh their words as gifts or as mail that comes in, but I'm not going to put them in charge of my self-confidence or who I am or success. That's just not reasonable. For me, as a parish priest, I had lots of relationships with lots of clergy. Mostly Orthodox clergy, but even some non-Orthodox clergy. And I got a lot of strength from that. We need to identify our needs and identify where to get those needs met. And we can't be investing in grouchy, broken people who have power struggles and use the church to play power games.
We've been blessed to be speaking with His Grace Bishop John Abdalah. Our topic has been loving thy neighbor, even if they are difficult. For our viewers, we ask that you please fill out the evaluations that will be coming to you following this broadcast. This webinar will also be archived and available on YouTube, or I should say on the Clergy Couple Care website. And please look for future Clergy Couple Care webinars that will be coming to us. Thank you, Your Grace, for being with us today.
Thank you, Father. It's been fun.